This is TWiT.
The first episode of a self-driving Uber car. There was a human in the car, but the car was in auto driving mode at the time when this happened. It crashed into, killed a pedestrian in Arizona. And I believe this is the first incident we've had of a self-driving car killing a pedestrian. And the upshot of the investigation that has proceeded in the wake of the accident, which was last Sunday, is the chief of police in Tempe has concluded that Uber is not likely responsible for the crash that killed a 49-year-old pedestrian named Elaine Hertzberg. Elaine was pushing her bicycle on a median next to the road. The bicycle was loaded down with plastic shopping bags, and she quickly veered from the center median into a lane of traffic. And the police chief doesn't, expresses concern or skepticism that any car could have avoided her when they reviewed the video and saw the way in which she entered the traffic lane and considered the lighting. It was dark at the time, et cetera. So probably, according to the police chief there, and I'm sure various investigations are still unfolding, including NTSB investigations, Uber may not be legally at fault with this one. And so although it's bad PR for self-driving Uber cars and self-driving cars in general, apparently this one may have been pedestrian caused rather than car caused. Any thoughts, Tiffany?
I think it's interesting that law enforcement made this determination so quickly that Uber wasn't at fault. Mm-hmm. Obviously they have a cynical view of this would be that they have their reasons, right? That the state of Arizona decided to allow self-driving cars on the road, which has encouraged companies like Uber to test their fairly untested technology on the roads in Arizona, right? So if something then happens and it's the fault of those new cars, that could have potential political consequences. I also think, though, that it's a little questionable because, sure, a human driver maybe would not have seen that pedestrian. It's hard to see things in the dark, right? We don't have night vision as human beings. But the issue is that the LiDAR systems that these self-driving cars use, they actually do have night vision. The entire point is that they can see better than humans. They can sense further. They can tell where objects are at a better, a more efficient rate than human beings can. So this failure doesn't really strike me as something that, just would have happened if the person was driving. This is a sort of harm that self-driving cars was supposed to prevent, but it really doesn't seem to have done so in this case.
Yeah, I'm glad that, both Uber and the NTSB, and I'm sure various state regulatory agencies will look into this further. Because, we, as you say, we have the opinion of the police chief as to who was culpable here, having reviewed some video, and various factors are going to come into play here. It could be that they wind up concluding that the car actually handled the situation better than a human driver could have. It could be that this is just an instance of, a reckless or careless behavior on the part of the pedestrian that would have been deadly in any situation. And that maybe, as you point out, with the enhanced abilities of these cars, that it handled it as well as could be expected. Or we may, on the other end of the spectrum, decide that, a human might have given the woman wider berth or taken a step that this car did not in this situation. So it's so early days with these things. It's a little bit terrifying to think that the way that they're being tested is just to go out on the road and see what they hit and whether they have a better record when it comes to safety than all of the rest of us plowing around in our cars. But that is the hope, I guess. Any thoughts, Mike?
Yeah. Well, more in the form of a question. From the accounts I read, wasn't there a safety driver involved? I mean, somebody was behind the wheel of this thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the rush to judgment or the rush to clear Uber, it seemed, well, that kind of complicates it a little bit further, I would think, in that, I mean, I assume the purpose of having a safety driver there is to make sure that you've got a human that's ready to intercede in the event that the technology doesn't do its job. So, what was that person doing? Were they paying attention to what was going on? Should they have noticed the poor person that was ultimately killed? I mean, so it seems like there's a lot of complicating factors that need to be resolved here.
Yeah, let's hope he or she was not just tuning out to Netflix while the car was in auto mode.
Right.
Matt, any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things. The first is that it probably, whether the intentions of the sheriff was good or some political motive, like it probably wasn't a good idea for him to weigh in on the legal implications of this, because if you look at Uber, what Uber did, I think they did the right thing, and they said, hey, we're really sorry for this woman, and we're going to shut down everything, and we're going to make sure that we're doing everything correctly, and that was probably the correct response. Obviously, we're all really sorry for this woman as well. This is nothing to celebrate, or this is a big day for autonomous driving. The second thing is that, like, when we think about the standards of negligence, and I'm not familiar with Arizona's law, but this is sort of like the blurred lines thing, in that negligence is determined at the jury level. And so what's going to be put in front of a fact pattern for these jurors is that, was it negligent or was it not? And one thing that we'll see over the next couple of years is sort of what the discussion was coming about is, what is the standard of negligence? Is it an ordinary human or an ordinary human driver, or is it a whatever the technology is? So it'll be a really interesting legal question, which will reach the appellate level of what is the standard of negligence, and it'll be in all 50 different states. And this is something we'll be tracking, I'm sure, for years to come as the law develops here. An interesting way to look at that is that when horses were the way of transportation, negligence was not the same for a car. It was typically higher for the car early on. There was all kind of crazy laws about just not having cars too, because they were loud and noisy and boisterous and tended to hit things at higher speeds. So that's just something that we'll have to watch and see how it develops. So I don't think there's a really clear, you can say it's negligence or not, when we don't even know what the standard of negligence is going to be. So
right. Those are really good points. Those are really good points, as is your assumption in making them all, that this is going to wind up in court before a jury at some point. And there are various avenues for it to get there, whether the heirs of the woman who was killed decide to sue Uber, whether some regulatory body decides or law enforcement body decides that there's some reason and basis under state or federal law to bring a court action on this. But I think it's a good guess that it will wind up in court, but it's not something that I had necessarily jumped to right away. I sort of had considered that, in this wide open Wild West world of testing self-driving cars, that maybe some sort of regulatory proceeding might be the way that this goes. But you're right, at some juncture, whether it's this case or some other one, a jury is going to be asked to determine whether one of these companies was negligent, and it will be interesting to see how they deal with those issues. What do you think about that, Tiffany?
I think it's interesting. I think I first would like to ask, did any of you watch the actual video of what happened? I mean, it's a little disturbing. So it's the video taken from the dash cam that shows exactly what the person in the car was seeing, and also shows the reaction of the human safety driver after the accident.
Oh.
But it does show that the human safety driver was not watching the road. That person was looking down probably at a cell phone. when it happened.
Oh dear.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's that issue.
Yeah. So there's.
Oh, there we go. Oh yeah.
There's good.
So if you're watching our video, it's rolling right now, and oh yeah, he's very much taken by surprise, and not really watching the road at the time.
There's good statistics that an individual who is not like fully engaged in driving a car is actually more of a liability to be in the car driving it, because the reaction time is that sort of like I'm jumping and whoa, this happened quickly, because your ability to pay attention to something that you're not actively paying attention to is just much lower, and so you tend to overcorrect and over respond when that happens. So it's yeah, I always think it's a sort of a strange strategy to have these people in the car when, like, think about riding in the car for 5 hours and not driving, and like how realistically how I couldn't stay focused for 12 hours. I don't care how much they're paying me. There's just no way.
I mean, that's what truck drivers do, though, right?
Yeah, well, except for they're driving the car the whole time. Like they're actively touching the wheel.
It's more engaging.
Yeah, so there's a response feedback loop that you're getting internally, and if you're just jumping in, you're not connected with the response internal loop. But yeah, I mean, I would assume that truck drivers, go through some of the same stuff in that they're going down the road straight, but they still have their hands on the wheel. They're still like, even if you're not totally engaged, you're engaged at some level where you don't have to be, and so you tend to like grab the wheel and move quickly. So. And there's good statistics that shows that it's just not. It's better to not have someone in the car than to have somebody who can intervene in a sudden jolt.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, in the truck driver scenario, their personal safety is on the line and is completely or largely in their own hands, right? If they're not paying attention, they're putting themselves at risk. So they have a strong self-interest in making sure that they are doing what they need to do. But when you're a safety driver for a self-driving car in auto mode, you have delegated some of those tasks, at any rate, to the car as the primary responsible agent, and you're just there for oversight. And you might not feel that oversight requires that minute attention that driving actually does.